And we have an august panel here, and I'll start on the left with Gary Restani. Gary is a former classmate of mine at American Hospital Supply Corporation that some of you may remember, and he worked there for a number of years. But he also has spent time, continued on at Baxter, Zimmer. He then was at Convatec. He's been in diagnostics. He's the CEO right now, the CEO and president of Spiracur, which is a blossoming young company that's doing great things in Japan. First, he's got a great story about that. And he recently raised his D-series round, which in this day and age, for medical device companies, that's quite a development. The next individual to his right is Fumiaki Ikeno, somebody I had the pleasure of getting to know a number of years ago when I joined Mercator. He was doing research with our product over at Stanford. Fumi specializes in medical device development. He's an interventionalist at Stanford. He does work in the preclinical stage product area, and he's part of the Stanford Biodesign Group, and he's now translating that program to Japan. And he's very well versed in medical devices, medicine, and entrepreneurship. Our third person to the right of Fumi is Allan Johnston, who happens to be a Canadian. That just came up at lunch. I'm sorry you weren't there for that. He's been investing in medical and healthcare companies for over 22 years. He's well known in Silicon Valley and globally. His firm, Synergy, is very much focused on the Japanese market, and they work. They've got a very unusual situation as an investor, but they also work as an in-between, or go-between, as we would call it, between people in the United States and Japan and the United States. So he sees it from both sides. Our final panelist is Ken McDonnell, somebody who is a classmate of mine in the real sense. He went to the University of Notre Dame. We managed to meet several years ago when I came to Mercator also. He is the general manager of business development in the United States for Terumo Corporation. I've had many interactions with Ken over the last decade, I think now, including spending time at Casey McGlynn's party at Christmas. But Ken is a focused individual in the healthcare field. He's a little broader than just medical devices. He's done work in the stem cell area as well. And he brings a tremendous amount of knowledge about being in a Japanese company, looking for things here in the United States, opening up markets in the United States, and bringing technologies back to Japan. So please give a hand to our distinguished panel of speakers. Now, we want to spend time today talking about business opportunities through a U.S.-Japan business collaboration. And it's our hope at the end of the day that a lot of our discussion is, and you heard the talk earlier, about where things are moving in Japan. And that's really what we all want to know, is where are things moving? Where are the opportunities? We're going to explore ways to try and increase the interaction between Japan and the United States, particularly with innovative companies. And one of the things that Okada-san and I talked about when we first met was the regulatory framework. And it goes both ways. People individuals in Japan are equally mystified by our regulatory framework, particularly when you add payment to it, as we are about the Japanese framework. So hopefully we'll demystify some of that. Now, at lunch, Fumi and I and others were talking about Silicon Valley, and it might be useful to start off because I don't think people truly understand the importance of Silicon Valley, in the sense that Silicon Valley is very different than Minneapolis or Denver or Research Triangle or Boston. Over half of all the venture money that's invested in the United States is invested in California, with the majority of that in Northern California. Silicon Valley has what we call a cluster. And it's not one cluster, it's multiple clusters. It has a bio-cluster, a pharma cluster, a device cluster, subsegment that into a diagnostics cluster, an IT cluster, a digital health cluster, a services cluster, and something that you don't see, It's got a consumer marketing orientation cluster, as well as a business-to-business cluster, in terms of overlaying all of that. Now, that is a tremendous asset that we have available to us. When you look at other clusters around the United States, you will find one or two, maybe just one, maybe three, but not the concentration of clusters that we have in Silicon Valley. And that creates a very unique ecosystem, particularly now for somebody like me that's been in devices for so many years, as we move into digital health and start digitizing medical devices and providing information for the clinician. So that makes Silicon Valley really unique, not only in the United States, but in the world. As I've told many people over many years, I grew up in Chicago, and if you were in Chicago, the culture here is so different. And you went to a cocktail party, and somebody said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work for Baxter." The next question is, "What's your title?" If you told them you were in a startup, they'd say, "You've got to be crazy." Out here in Silicon Valley, if you go to a cocktail party and you tell somebody you work in a startup, the first thing they say, "Who's funding you? What series are you?" It's all about the startup. It's a very different culture out here. Now, if you told them you worked for Baxter, they'd say, "Are you crazy?" It's that different. The one thing about Japan that we all have to consider, and its importance, is that it's ahead of us and many other countries on the aging of the population. And this has been a tremendous drag on their economy and how they've been trying to figure out how to move forward and get a growing economy. But that's an opportunity, because Japan is facing the problem of an aging population from a healthcare perspective well before we are. The percentage of, I think, of people over 65, there's 25%, and here it's around 15%. Somebody was talking about that today, 14%. So think about that. They've got this gigantic growing population that they have to serve. That's where a lot of new ideas are going to come from, those people that are trying to serve those needs that are going to flow to the United States and other markets. So keep that in mind. It's a very, very key point. And the aging of the population is not unique to Japan or the United States or Europe. And what a lot of people don't realize, because we hear a lot about China, do you realize in 2015, China starts to age because of their one-child policy? And that's what people lose sight of. We've got a global aging problem that we're going to be dealing with, or opportunity, depending on how you look at it. Another thing I want to add is that Dr. Hoover talked about information, and I strongly urge you, if you haven't, to pick up George Gilder's new book, Knowledge and Power. He talks about how we create jobs, and I think Silicon Valley represents this. It's the flow of knowledge. It's the flow of information. We have people who leave one company, go to another. They take the learnings of that company to another company, so it's all additive, and it becomes, in the aggregate, a tremendous explosion of new ideas. So information flow is critical. Your being here and learning about what's going on in Japan adds to your information. The more, I always loved reading Steve Jobs, the story about Steve Jobs. He pushed the envelope and exposed himself to a lot of new things. The more you do that as a person, the more you're going to connect dots and see things that other people can't see. So those are some things to keep in mind as we talk about what's going on, between the United States and Japan. Now, to get things started, I think it's very important. Each of these individuals have a little bit of a story. And let's provide some context as we'll start a little bit with how they ended up, somebody like Ken, in a Japanese corporation. Or Synergy. How did they end up doing the work they're doing? I mean, he started out as a venture capitalist, and now he's over there spending all his time in Japan. And Fumi is going back and forth. And we have Spiracur, who's one of the first companies probably the first company, I think, to get an approval in Japan before the getting in Europe, which has really been the path. So I'm going to start first with Ken. And not a lot of time, maybe 5 minutes, but tell us a little bit about your background. How you and some of the things you've learned along the way, the great lessons.
25 minutes? Okay, my background has been medical devices for my entire career. And it's really been sandwiched between working for two large multinational companies. Early in my career was Corning Medical, a very large organization. and now it's Terumo. But in between, I was involved in 8 different early-stage startup companies. And it's interesting when Tom asked how I got to meet Terumo, is that I met them through my last startup called Infraretics, which is out in Cambridge. And let me talk a little bit about Terumo, then I'll talk back about my own background. But Terumo is about a $5 billion corporation dedicated to medical devices. And I got to say, having worked for them for 10 years, I'm really impressed by their innovation already. It's an organization that has looked forward, and part of my role is really to bring in some perspective from early stage companies into the organization to start getting that type of innovative culture. And it's gone so far where the organization now has actually put an innovator team at the Fogarty Institute of Innovation and has now investments in venture capital to get some visibility on it. So I kind of digress away from my background, which I said a lot of startups, really to Terumo and their innovative approach, which I think is an interesting model that we certainly will talk about. And now is not the right time, but certainly later this afternoon, really address how we kind of see the ecosystem and how we look forward to participating in it.
Thank you. Allan?
Well, I guess I got into venture capital in 1992. I was at SRI International before that in the bioengineering research lab. One of the companies spun out of that lab was Intuitive Surgical, which was a pretty big success. I wasn't directly involved in that, but more in the diagnostic side. So, and you know, at SRI we were able to do projects if we could find funding. So we did a lot of marketing, a lot of techno-economic studies for companies. Started working with some Japanese companies then, Olympus and Tokyo Gas, Hitachi. I used to go to Japan a lot to work on Hitachi clinical chemistry analyzers. So we started Synergy about, I guess, 18 years ago today.
Really?
Approximately, anyway. And our objective there was to leverage our contacts in Japan, both from my days at SRI and as well as Berkeley International Capital, and focus on medical devices, forging partnerships between Japanese companies and U.S. companies, and raising funds from Japanese corporate investors over there. So I've kind of worked my way over to the medical device side from being in chemistry, but it's a great area. It's a small world. You know, we know everybody, and everybody knows us, and we think there's some great opportunities. It has changed over the years. In the old days, you know, reimbursement was much higher in Japan. It was a great market. Reimbursement has been squeezed. But, you know, Japan still looks to the U.S. for innovative medical technology. And now we see more and more innovative medical ideas coming out of Japan. And we want to go do a two-way street. We want to go both ways now. Bring in technology from Japan to the U.S., cooperation, as well as the old traditional way of bringing U.S. startups to Japan.
Thank you. Fumi?
Yes, I think I am the only Japanese passport holder here,
Yes.
right? So here, please look, this is Japanese. Yes, actually I came here, Stanford, 2001, about 13 years ago, after 9 years clinical experience in Japan. So my boss in Japan forced me to come to U.S. at Stanford. So honestly, I was not so interested in coming to Stanford. So, but at that time, I didn't know anything about medical devices. I didn't know anything about my research. But my research was to develop medical devices collaborating with starting up company in Silicon Valley, especially for cardiovascular diseases. So in US, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer. So the very hot topic about 13 years ago. So, but unfortunately in Japan, of course, we still have a big Japanese medical device company like a Terumo, Olympus, some Goodman or good distributors. But unfortunately, we don't have any starting up company. Still very rare. So, but I learned, I exposed lots of different culture in Silicon Valley between Japan and the US. I'm sorry, different from Japan. So I learned several different, thinking way, opinion, but I tried to explain Japanese people, so how important starting up company or entrepreneurship, but they didn't listen to me. But surprisingly, 2 years ago, Prime Minister Abe became a prime minister. So he said medical device should be one of the most important industry to reverse Japanese culture, or I'm sorry, economy. So, and suddenly people try to listen to my opinion, and everybody want to ask me to come to Japan, give a talk, and this is a suddenly change. I didn't notice 13 years ago. It's like a Steve Jobs. It's very difficult to connect the dot to record. So I totally understand. Maybe I have to do something for medical device industry in Japan. So the reason why I'm sitting here.
Thank you. You're doing a lot. Gary, your story.
Tom, thank you. Yes, I go back 40 years, so I'm going to try to condense it in a few key statements here. We were classmates, so to speak, with American Hospital Supply. I consider American Hospital one of the great organizations that have come through the medical device field. I then progressed to a lot of international assignments, so I have a real affinity for getting products to other countries. As I too am a Canadian, by the way. So they used to farm me out to only the Canadian guy will handle the overseas assignments. So I used to go to Europe, and I was always there to start establishing European markets. Similarly, in Asia Pacific, when I became head of the Zimmer International Group, I had the good fortune of spending a lot of time in Japan and seeing the robust potential of the Japanese infrastructure in a very buoyant specialty of orthopedics. And in Convatec, in the wound care devices. And aging of the population is a big area in wound care. And that's where I came to Spiracur. I'm going to fast forward a bit. I was retired and feeling the itch to get back in, and I saw this wonderful innovation that was going to really help the diabetes and wound care dilemma that we're facing with chronic wounds, and I joined Spiracur. And with this opportunity at Spiracur, there was a real sense that in establishing a market, you obviously start at home, and to your point, Europe is always the second market, sometimes the first market when reimbursement and FDA is so challenging to get to. We were fortunate we got FDA early on. Reimbursement was more challenging. So we went to Europe, and Europe is becoming much, much more challenging, both on the regulatory side and on the reimbursement side. So in the presentations today, I heard a couple of words like agility, and from our other guest speaker, and also from Yoko-san about the need for progressing under Abenomics. I think Japan has a wonderful opportunity to jump into a situation now where Europe, which was traditionally the go-to market for U.S. companies after the U.S., they now have a tremendous opportunity by accelerating their policies and jumping into the fray. We were fortunate. We are now launched in Japan. It only took us 18 months to get reimbursement. To get a shonin approval. Unheard of. We had some great clinical studies, having said that. We did a lot of hard work. And we got reimbursement later this last year in 2013, and we're launching in Japan as we speak. We just came back from a launch in Japan. We see Japan as a real opportunity for us, and I'm just thrilled that I'm here to experience this in I'll use the word commercially, but startup not that long ago. We just came through that eye of the needle of a startup, and we're now commercial, but just commercial, and already in Japan because it makes sense for us to be in Japan. So I'll stop there.
So yeah. I'm going to ask a question as a follow-up to get the discussion moving in another direction. If you were to point to, I was fascinated to hear about the story about Japan ahead of Europe. If you were to point to one or two critical actions that you took that facilitated that you could share with the group, some insight, could you do that for us?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give a little kudos to the fella 2 seats over here and his organization because they were critical in getting us to this decision. I was hesitant to go into Japan at this early stage in a small company. Usually, like I said, you establish your U.S. business and then wait. Why? Because of the previous concerns of how long it takes to get into Japan. Allan and Rob, who are part of the Synergy group, came to me with an opportunity that had been germinating in his contact with people in Japan that were looking at the space we were in and seeing a potential. This is a very unique space for chronic wounds, and we have a product called negative pressure wound therapy, which really helps the patient heal significantly faster. But our product was very, very innovative in the sense that it weighs 2.2 ounces and totally disposable, where prior to that you had something the size of a car battery and the patient was tethered to the bed. So they had to be in the hospital, and this was more to the home, community, or to the clinic sale. And I think Allan and his team and our partners, who was, I can mention them, right, CMI, Century Medical in Japan, saw the vision that with the changes that are coming because of their aging of the population, those type of wounds like diabetic foot ulcers, venous leg ulcers cannot be handled in the hospital. You can't be in a hospital for 30 days to handle such a therapy, to take on such a therapy. They saw there was a potential outlet. And sure enough, our product, I think, became a real vehicle to allow that to happen. And it was really came to fruition when we got our reimbursement. After we got shown it, we got reimbursement for 1 week in the hospital and 3 weeks in the community. I believe we're the first product to go through that reimbursement cycle. So I never would have believed it, that this was how things were going to happen like this in Japan. I'm sorry, I had predispositions, but I was fortunate to see that happen in a relatively short cycle of time of 18 months to 2 years. And now, if they continue to act like, I think they'll be able to compete, not just in my area, of course, but in other disciplines.
So, a quick summary, what I heard is, first of all, good data.
Mm-hmm.
You made the economic, I mean, you were able to demonstrate the clinical value as well as the economic value. Timing is critical. There's a change taking place, and timing, I think all of us in the venture world can make or break a company, a good company and a bad company, so, or a good company in particular. But and then having a good partner,
The right
which
partner, critical.
yeah, okay,
Absolutely.
thank you, Ken. Let's switch gears here a minute and talk a little bit about. You're over there a lot, and you come here. What are you looking for when you come into the United States for technologies to invest in for Terumo? And I'm not sure, what is Terumo looking to maybe sell, out-license as well? I don't know if you're doing any out-licensing. But let's talk a little bit about when you're in the U.S., what are you looking for? What catches you? What are the 3 or 4 characteristics of a technology or a company that you're looking at?
Well, certainly that first, the United States is such a rich well of innovative ideas, just because of the networking of the community, the industry, the clinicians, manufacturers. So that type of dialogue, very fluid, very effective, and it certainly brings forward innovations quicker than elsewhere. What we look for certainly are those that are meaningful with regard to the size of the market. We're looking for things that are well protected in terms of IP. We're also looking for things that we can manufacture well, and the Japanese manufactures things extraordinarily well. So we look for areas we can capitalize on that. And certainly we also look with regard to the competitive position, and if we think we have a strong enough position to develop a marketplace early on, or if we need to follow. I would say that we approach things with a lot of risk aversity. I think it's one of our issues that we're dealing with, and Terumo has been addressing that, I think, effectively over the last couple of years, trying to reach out into the United States, being more aggressive, again, with a number of acquisitions, but also, as I mentioned before, with some innovative approaches with regard to product development, including participating down at the Fobert Institute for Innovation.
The next question is going to be for Fumi and Allan. We're going to split it into 2 parts. I think everyone's interested in where is the puck going? Where are things moving towards? We heard some very interesting things today, just before this meeting. I realize they're probably still in the concept stage of being implemented, maybe not. So maybe with Allan first, from a business perspective, what's your sense on where things are moving, and particularly for entrepreneurs that think about, should I really invest my time in exploring Japan?
I think things have changed for the better overall. It seems to be easier to get approval without doing a Japanese clinical trial. That makes a big difference. Spiracur didn't have to do one. They had a great data set though as well. So if you have a good randomized clinical trial from Europe and the U.S., let's say, that fulfills the PMDA's requirements, protocols, then you may not have to do a trial at all. And we've seen that in more and more cases these last few years. That makes a big difference. In terms of reimbursement, of course, that's a different issue. It always is it can be a tough road. Cardiovascular devices, PTCA balloons, they get hammered every 2 years, and it's tough. I mean, it's not like the old days when you could sell a balloon for, I don't know, $2,500. Those are gone now. But we see a lot of interest in the traditional distributor model, but we see other companies trying to get into the medical field as well. I mean, companies you would never think of. Brother, for example, that makes printers and sewing machines. They have a very focused strategy to see what kind of medical devices might be appropriate for their internal R&D capabilities, internal manufacturing. Sony, they have an alliance with Olympus now. They want to move into different fields of medical. A variety of companies that you would never even think of. So we have the traditional big manufacturers like Terumo and Olympus, Nipro. You have the distributors like CMI. You have the local organizations from St. Jude and Medtronic in Boston. But you have a lot of other new companies coming in. And in the, especially in the area you might want to call digital health or mobile health or wearable technology, we see companies like Omron, NTT Docomo, Toray, Epson, Sony, of course. They're all looking at this area as a potential way to introduce new products. Maybe not medical as much as consumer healthcare products, but we think that will be a continuum. I mean, there will be products that will span everything from monitoring old people at home to doing chronic health monitoring, more medical device than a consumer device. So we think there's some great opportunities. The government support, Dr. Ikeno will talk about that, and the financial support from funds that have just been raised in Japan, like MedVenture Partners, which is going to help these ideas blossom in Japan with the help of U.S. startups as well. So we think there's some great opportunities coming.
So based on Dr. Hoover's discussion about the democratization, are all these, this is for you, Allan, are all these changes leading to, we've always seen Japan somewhat rigid in terms of almost like a caste system of big companies, medium, and very little companies. Are we going to see a democratization of medical device development in Japan?
I don't know. I think Dr. Ikeno might be better to answer that because he'll see it from the ground, from the seed up.
Okay.
We have started up a couple of companies actually from Japanese entrepreneurs. That was one of our goals in our first fund. We called it the JET concept, Japan Entrepreneur Transplant, where we would take an idea from a doctor or engineer in Japan and start it up in Silicon Valley. And we did that a couple times with ideas from Dr. Kato, who's a top cardiologist in Japan. So he started up a company in the Bay Area called Retrovascular, developing devices for chronic total occlusions. Local funding, but as well as Japanese funding from Asahi Intech. So we think that it's tough to do. It's hard to go back and forth to Japan to do the early startup stuff, but I think it's going to be much easier with the support of new funds.
Fumi, could you add to that?
Yes, I have to say some sales point of Japan because I'm Japanese. So actually the CEO of Park mentioned Japan has some culture to avoid the failure, right? So it's maybe big disadvantage for entrepreneurship. But the current Prime Minister Abe made a huge mistake 5 years ago when he was the first time for the Prime Minister. But now he's the second time. He's doing a good job. So it means Japanese people understand, okay, our prime minister made a big mistake, but the second time he succeeded. So that's a very important message for us. So still we have such a culture. I think that's not only Japan, but also all of the Asian countries. So failure, people want to avoid the failure. Of course, everywhere in the world, but the reason why they don't want to take a risk. But I think it's changing. So especially younger generation, they are thinking about, okay, maybe to start a new company instead of staying the same company forever. So that's a changing. So especially medical device field, still compared with IT field, our entrepreneur is still very, very low number. But for example, Hajime, my incubation fund in Japan, the CEO is here. So we started the incubation fund last year. That's a spin-off from IncJ. IncJ is a spin-off of the METI. That's a huge venture fund. So we started the medical device incubation fund in Japan. So we are now searching at least 2,000 different kind of technology to incubate. So, and we found out, okay, some of the technology or ideas are very brilliant. So the next step is, so how to incubate? Where is the ecosystem in Japan? Of course, some of the technology Japanese company are very good at, I think, making it. But some of the part, maybe we need somewhere in the world the help. So we are thinking about, of course, maybe future some technology we're going to bring to Silicon Valley to incubate some part and maybe go back to Japan. So or go back to the other countries. So that's I'm thinking to do for future. And also future direction in Japan, as you mentioned, so aging population is growing up. So when I was in Japan, I did a clinical doctor in the rural area in Shizuoka Prefecture. But there, the aging population is about, I think, 39%. Aging population means aged more than 65 years old. So 39% in whole population. So that's huge. So, but in 2040, Japan average old aging population is about 39%, same as that I experienced. So I think we need something like maybe to take care of elder people. Like expenditure of the healthcare, most likely, I think in Japan, the aging society makes growing up. So I think maybe Silicon Valley IT technology, IT idea may help. So the elder people in Japan, and the aging society in Japan, that's maybe future. I think that's where we can do collaboration between Japan and the US.
So my only comment is that I've learned over the years that while the Japanese culture is one of risk aversion, I've also learned that VCs often tend to be, they don't like failure either, no matter how they tell you they do. That failure is always a hard thing to accept. So now let's switch gears again. And I know we have some people, I believe, here from Japan as well. And we've talked a little bit about accessing technology here, but let's look at it the other way. Let's talk about the companies here, whether they're big or medium-sized or small, on accessing technology there. And I think I'll start with Allan first. Or can you have a comment you want to make?
Yeah, I think it's a real important topic that you bring it up. I don't spend a lot of time in Japan, but from a distance, talking to my colleagues with the literature, people like me, it's really interesting how they very much appreciate how innovation is done in the United States. You've got discovery, you've got the translation, you've got the commercialization. You look at Japan, it's fragmented. Here we have discovery funded by NIH, $12 billion. We've got the translation, which works with the universities and the venture capital community. That works really well in certain areas, particularly in the Bay Area. And then you have commercialization with good partners to take it to the national. It's kind of the ecosystem. And Japan, I think, recognizes that and is making big strides to mimic it. I think that offers a lot of potential when they get there. So, for instance, they actually have a focused effort to develop an organization funding similar to NIH, with the Ministry of Health. I think it's very important to recognize that. That's a funding opportunity. And then certainly that would go down to the university level, where I think there the connection between the government and university may not be really, really effective. And then it kind of, right now, it kind of breaks down from the university back to the industry. And I think that Fumi's comment with regard to incubation is really how Terumo sees that as a big opportunity with regard to taking those innovative ideas and working a little bit faster outside Japan, but bring that talent and that process back to Japan to learn and integrate it into your own process in Japan. So again, a comment with regard to how ecosystem is very important. Japan isn't quite with us right now, but they see that. I think it's a clear target to go after that. It's a big opportunity for everybody in this room, depending no matter which way we're in.
And Allan, in your work, do you ever look for technology to bring back here for companies? They've asked you to do that in some of your work?
You know, we haven't done a lot of going out and looking at like cold calls, if you know what I mean, but it's amazing what's out there when you hear about it. And we learn about that mainly through interactions with the companies there, as well as the KOLs, the doctors. And I guess the old days, you know, if a doctor, a KOL for Olympus, for example, if they wanted something really badly and Olympus wanted to keep them happy, they would build a device for them, right? Maybe not the best way for a startup, but that was what was done. We just got back from Japan today. We saw last week a fantastic looking surgical tool for carotid surgery that this doctor in Japan developed, and a company is having it made for him. It could be a startup, I'm not sure, but it sure looked like an amazing tool. On the other side, when we introduce new technologies from the U.S. to Japan, we often see that the Japanese doctors have done a homemade version of the same type of technology. We're talking about a blunt dissector, for example, really innovative technology from North Carolina. And one of our contacts said, well, we know a doctor that's doing a similar thing with an electric toothbrush. He's kind of modified an electric toothbrush. And for Spiracur, the doctors were making their homemade little suction pumps with sponges and everything, right? They were mimicking what they saw or what they believed would be good, but no one was building it for them or it wasn't available anywhere. In neurosurgery, you know, we've seen some really interesting technologies for removing blood after subarachnoid hemorrhage, homemade by key opinion leaders who wanted the technology, who wanted the procedure done and figured out a way to do it, but it didn't translate into a startup. And that's where I think the change will come. These new ideas, when they're identified, will be translated into startups.
Gary, I don't want to avoid you. Do you have anything you want to add from your experience as a guy running a company that's always looking for innovation?
Well, I'll just make one comment on that. Technology comes this way, and all we've heard is some reaction to things where someone sees something happening and will try to. I think that, again, if Abenomics really wants to work, they have an opportunity based on this aging of the population. What better area to really be a leader in developing technology for the aged, for diseases related to the aged, than in Japan? And so there, I think, if the will is there to really establish something, that's where they could bring something to the rest of the world that they have data supporting them with. That's I think, the best way to do it. I just wanted to, so that was just a philosophical thought on mine. But more importantly, from a practical, and I don't know if there's any people from the Japanese ministry or groups in here, council, but something, you know, where this nimbleness, this agility that is being promoted, I really applaud that. I think these are great steps. But there's a very important segment they've got to address, and that's in this pricing issue. We heard that reimbursement is coming down. In the old days, companies used to say, Japan, just 3x the price in the U.S. and sell it over there, and it would work. Those days are gone. We were saying at lunch, what is it, maybe 1.5 to 1.2 times the price?
Yeah,
So
actually
very
1.3.
important.
Yes, it will be 1.3 times.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is the reason for that is you're transferring a product to Japan now because there's a multi-tiered structure once the product gets there where the value is eaten up between all the levels of distribution before it gets from the manufacturer or the partner distributor to the patient. There's a national distributor, a regional distributor, a local distributor, a hospital distributor. That has to change because companies will not be able to absorb the cost. Manufacturers won't be able to take that cost at their end. And if they don't have that opportunity, they're going to move to other countries. So I think all of this all these great initiatives are important, but they've got to get to the practical issues as well. Just a thought from
So what you say reminds me of my experience in Europe in the 70s as we were bringing annuity products into the hospital, particularly Germany is what comes to mind. And as we talked about the fact that you wouldn't have the problem with infection, single use, and on and on and on, there was a political problem. It's called jobs. Because as they adopt single-use products, all those people that were sterilizing the product were going to lose their jobs. And I suspect Japan's no different in terms of this distribution system. There are a lot of people employed in these multiple levels. So that's not an easy problem to solve. It has to be solved long-term. But it's just not, that's a political issue. And we just have to be aware that it's there. Hopefully they can make some changes. But I want to get into politics.
right.
But it's an important issue. It's an important issue. Fumi.
Yes, actually, yes, that's I agree, 100% agree. So there were several different kind of distributor, primary distributor, secondary distributor, sometimes third distributor. They have to, people, especially from foreign countries, company have to go through the same pathway. So the price, the device become higher usually. So the profit is becoming decreased. So that's a problem. But for example, recently, like GE, General Electrics, they started to look for Japanese clinical unmet needs for medical device. They are the medical device development. So it means GE is trying to fix Japanese unmet needs and make a product in Japan. That's one thing. And also Covidien. So they are trying to find also Japanese unmet clinical needs from Japanese doctors, hospital, and incubate the devices in Japan. So they are trying to change. So I'm from Stanford Biodesign. So most important philosophy of the biodesign is to find unmet clinical needs to develop new devices. The most important things to find unmet clinical needs is to go to that place. So if you want to find some unmet clinical needs for aging society, everybody have to come to Japan to find it. So I think GE and Covidien did the same things. So, and maybe, I think some of the opportunity for foreign country, maybe come to Japan to start R&D facilities, even the small, that's fine, think tank, that's fine, and to find maybe unmet clinical needs and to develop the devices to fix the aging society. That's maybe one way to think about.
Okay. So we've been talking at you for quite a time, and we want to turn it around and let you ask questions. So there'll be a microphone. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Make sure you identify the person that you would like to respond and be very clear about the question you'd like answered. Do we have any questions from our audience? There's one.
Hi, my name is Shigeru Tanaka. My company is basically founded to bring surgeon or physician ideas to market, much like your JET idea. And my question was, is there any issues for Japanese ideas or doctors coming here with the newness or the smallness of the people you're dealing with? I know that's an issue, me Japanese myself, that could be an issue sometimes of not knowing, who you're talking to. And is there ways to address that? And probably Allan might be the best person to answer that one.
I think the real revolutionary doctors in Japan, they're pretty international these days, right? They go all over the world. They do procedures all over the world. And they're the ones, in general, that are developing these new ideas and concepts. They see an unmet need in their own position, in their own procedures, and they figure out a way to make it happen. Then they need to partner with somebody that can, basically build prototypes and help them navigate the strategy to get this product built and on the market. And as I mentioned before, in the old days, they would just ask their friendly, Olympus or Terumo to help them build it. I think now there's opportunities for them to start up companies in Japan or the U.S. or both. But I think probably both. Some operations in Silicon Valley, maybe the vendor, OEM manufacturers, some clinical work in Japan, some market work. Of course, the market work is important too. There has to be a big enough market. That's always an issue. Telling the doctor, well, it's a great product, but we can only sell a few hundred of them, in a year. So I think, the education of the Japanese physician as to what they need to look at as they develop a new idea and a product is important. But a lot of that can be free. I mean, they can come to Synergy, they can come to Dr. Ikeno, and, you know, we're happy to look and see what is good and what is bad. And, you know, we'll frankly give them ideas on what they should look for, what they should do.
Yes, actually, can I comment that question? So Japanese doctors have very brilliant idea, but they don't know how to implement that idea to product. Sometimes they satisfied writing paper and publish because that's sometimes their motivation. But I think these days it's gradually changing. So even the Japanese academic doctor are interested in to make a product to help lots of people in the world. So, but unfortunately, their education is only medicine. That's totally different from U.S. U.S. 4 years undergraduate and go to medical school. So I think they don't know how to implement, how to start a company, how to make a product. Just as they stop at the research phase. So I think somebody who can help them to implement from brilliant idea to a real product. That's maybe unmet needs for our ecosystem. So if you can help, you know, lots of people want to go to you, I think. Yes.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, Tom, Jack Mormon. So the question is there an over-the-counter market in Japan? The background, of course, is in the U.S. here with high deductible insurance and tricorders, if you think of those, self-diagnosis and maybe self-treatment, if you think it's going to go that way. So in Japan, is there a out-of-pocket market? Is there an over-the-counter market for products as we think will be increasingly in the U.S.?
I'll start off with that one. There is a market for certain products. I mean, Omron sells a lot of TENS devices, for example, you can't even buy in the U.S., right? Blood pressure monitors. In general, they're kind of classified as fun devices more than, you know, therapeutic devices or diagnostic tools. Even blood glucose meters you cannot buy over the counter in Japan. You need a prescription to buy a blood glucose meter. So it depends on whether it's classified in a kind of a fun category, you know, ambulatory, whatever, trackers, fitness trackers, or it actually does monitor disease or diagnose disease. And that is, that's a kind of a gray area now. I don't know if the U.S. is going to help with Japan defining these new technologies and how to get approval, you know, who's going to pay. I do think, though, for a mass market, healthy living type of product, you're not going to try to get reimbursement. You want to keep the price low enough that it should be over the counter and the patient should pay.
Anybody else want to add anything? Fumi?
Yes, actually, Japan, we have a very good universal health insurance system. So everybody bill health, treatment is not so expensive compared with United States. So if somebody buys some medical device from out of pocket, especially elder people, maybe hesitate because they pay only 10% of the total cost of the health cost. So I'm not sure, but for the younger people, for example, to keep their health condition better, so of course they will pay out of their pocket. So I think a little bit different between generations, I think.
Any other questions? Yes. Get the microphone, please.
Is just insurance policy, you pay for it and somebody get reimbursed by the insurance policy. That you are talking about in reimbursement, right?
Yes.
So 5 days now for the doctor and then 3 weeks for community. So that's why reimbursement is always
for our
there.
product specifically, for the wound care, 1 week for the doctor's help in the hospital and 3 weeks in the community. There's a set reimbursement rate for that.
Yes, we have we'll take you up front, and then we'll get you in the back, and that'll be the last question. We're going to have to cut it off to stay on time.
I'm Philly Guzman, and I represent a company that's into the wellness and healthy lifestyle. I would like to piggyback on the comments that Fumi had mentioned earlier, and I don't know if the Trade Economic Department can answer this, but do you have some kind of a program for businesses to go to Japan and do exploratory and discovery how the business environment really works?
Okada-san, I think that's you.
I think Okada-san.
Okada-san, you get to answer that.
Yeah, actually, as Mr. Kato and Mr. Yoko explained, we are now very focused on inward foreign direct investment into Japanese marketplace. So in that sense, we're very focused on investment. So if you are ready to invest into Japanese marketplace, we are ready to help you. But other than that, well, for example, only export, well, it might be more difficult. But if you are willing to invest, so for example, you are willing to set up your own subsidiary in Japan, we can help you. We can help you on research, market situation, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So please contact us.
Okay.
Yeah, so are you based in San Francisco? Okay, that's fine. So either to our office or our office, another office in LA. Yeah, okay.
You can get his card afterwards, and you can talk to them. We have another question in the way back there, and that's the last question, then we have to cut it off.
Hi, my name is Christopher Chan. I would like to ask a question for Maki-san. You mentioned earlier about health insurance in Japan. Do they have disability income insurance?
Disability insurance. I think that was your question.
Yes, we have, of course. Yes.
Is it developed like the United States, or is it just a little bit different, like more like a
Actually, I think, for example, it's a little bit different. So, for example, I'm sorry, I cannot explain detail, but a little bit different system. But we have a disability insurance, of course. Yes.
Is it like a big industry in Japan, or is it just like a small niche industry compared to the regular health insurance? It's
not so huge, I think. But what do you think? So, for example, I think everybody more than 40 years old have to pay some amount of money for the disability insurance, and that's for we call kaigo hoken. That is the insurance for taking care of disability people. So the amount is of course growing up currently, but I think. Do you have some current information? Kaigo hoken wa big businesses. Do you think that the kaigo hoken that's taking care of the disabled people insurance in Japan is growing up? I think it should be growing up, but it's also national insurance, not private insurance. So that's a big difference. So I think it's supported by a Japanese government. So that's not a health insurance company. So that's a big difference.
It certainly is a growth industry here. It's gone way out of sight. Okay, we're going to have to cut it off. First of all, I want to thank our panelists for taking time out of their busy days to join us today. Thank you very much for your insights. They will be available afterwards. I also want to note that Gallup had a book out 3 years ago about the coming jobs war. And when they wrote the book, they said that the global economy was 60 trillion, of which the U.S. was 15 trillion, and it was going to grow to 200 trillion over the next 25 years. So when you think about the growth in the global economy, there is a major war underway for jobs. It is in our best interest to work as much as we can across the Pacific or wherever to help create jobs, because it's going to be knowledge-based jobs. There's no doubt about it. But recently, which really astounded me, the global economy now, this was just a few years ago, is 80 trillion. So it's definitely moving in that direction. So jobs is really the issue on a global scale, and all countries are really getting wired into trying to figure out how to create jobs. And I think we're seeing evidence of that with what's going on in Japan. Well, thank you very much. Everybody will be available afterwards.